Now, in this lecture, we are going to talk about parameter scope. In the previous lecture, we understand how we can specify different position to your parameter, and we also understand how we can specify n number of parameter using asterisk. We also understand how we can store your n number of parameters in the dictionary using double asterisk. So this is the second part of the parameter tutorial. So let's talk about the parameter scope. If you just take a look at the previous lecture, then you can notice the parameter scopes are limited to the function. So if I try to access these variables, I'm going to get an error message. For example, if I get rid of this function, and right here I'm going to say print, and in this print, if I just try to access this x variable, if I say here x, and when I execute this file, I'm going to get an error message. The message is going to say name is not defined, because we don't have this x variable in this file. The x variable is only limited to this function. You can access all these parameters only in this function. So this is the limitation of these parameters. Now if you want to access the variable all over the file, you can use global variable. For example, if I just create here a variable x is equal to 1, then you can notice this is a global variable. When I execute this file, you can notice I'm going to have 1 as a result. Now you can access this variable all over the file because we did not specify any scope to this variable. So we can access it all over the file. Now you can take this statement as x label refers to the value 1. It's almost like using dictionaries, where the keys refers to the value, except that you're using an invisible dictionary. You can access this invisible dictionary using Python built-in function vars. Let me just get rid of this statement. And now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just create here a variable scope is equal to, and then I'm going to specify function to it, vars. And using this vars function, I can access all the global variables. So now using this scope variable, I can access all these variables. So here I'm going to say print, specify scope, and using square bracket, I'm going to just access the key x. So now when I print the statement, when I execute this file, I'm going to have 1 as a result. So now you can access all your global values using var function. So this var function is going to return a dictionary. So if I just get rid of this statement, you can notice I have dictionary as a result. So it's going to return a dictionary with the name of the variable and its value. So in this dictionary, I have this x variable and its value. I'm going to access it using square bracket and the key name x. You can access this variable value using the name of the variable. So I'm going to say here x, and when I execute the statement, I'm going to have 1 as a result. So now using this var variable, you can access any global variable. Var function returns all the variables. That doesn't matter where you put the variable. For example, if I just create here a variable z is equal to 0, then I can access this variable using scope variable. If I just say here print to the scope, I'm going to specify square bracket and then specify variable name. When I try to print this statement, I'm going to have 0 as a result. So now you can notice this var function is going to take this z variable as well inside the dictionary. And now you can access this dictionary using this scope variable, no matter where you put and create a new variable. Now this is what we call an invisible dictionary. You can also call this namespace or scope. Now what if you try to change the value of the x variable? So for example, if I just add here scope and access the x variable using key, and if I try to change the value of this x variable, if I just add 1 inside this x variable just like this, then what do you think? What will be the result? If I try to print this statement, I'm going to have 2 as a result. So I'm using this invisible dictionary to increase the value of the variable. So you can see, you can easily change the global scope variables. So this is what we call a global scope variable. Now what if the variables is in the function? So let me show you a very simple example. If I just get rid of this statement, let me just create here a function. So I'm going to start with a define keyword, and here I'm going to create a function boo. To this boo function, I'm going to pass single statement. So I'm going to say here x is equal to 42, just like this. So now you can notice I'm going to just use a single statement, and I'm going to put that statement just out of this colon. So this is my simple one-line statement function. Just for that, I'm going to just say here x is equal to 1. And if I just call this boo variable right here, if I try to print this x variable, then what do you think? What would be the result? If I execute this file, you can notice I'm going to have 1 as a result. You can't change the value of the x variable using this function, because this is the global variable, and here the x refers to the global variable. As I said, you can't access the value of the function because function variables are accessible only inside the functions. So this function can't change the global variable. That is because when you call boo function, a new namespace, or you can say a new scope, is created, which is used for a block inside foo. So here is the new namespace created, or you can say a new scope created for the x variable. You can access this x variable only inside this function, and this is what we call a global variable. So you can't access this variable outside of this function because this variable has their own scope. Variables that are used inside the function like this are called local variables. The parameters of the function work just like local variables. So what if you want to change the global variable value using function? Is there any way to do that? Yes, you can do that. As you know, if you access the value of a variable inside a function, it automatically becomes a local unless you tell the Python otherwise. By specifying a global keyword, you can tell the Python to use a global variable. So, for example, if I just add here a new statement with a global keyword, then I'm going to specify Python to use global value here. So if I just say here global x, then Python use global variable here and change the value of the global variable. When I execute this file, you can notice I'm going to have 42 as a result, because this time this function is going to change the value of this global variable because I specify Python to change the value of this global variable. I inform Python to not take this x variable as local variable. I specify global keyword for that. So whenever you want to change the global variable value, you can use this global keyword. Now we know a lot about functions and function parameter. You've learned a lot about making functions and calling them. You might know functions can call other function as well. What might come as surprise is that functions can call themselves. Yes, you heard it right. Function can call themselves. But why do we need to call a function themselves? Now let's take a look at a very simple example to understand it. Now let's consider this example. Assume you want to calculate the power, just like the built-in power function in Python, or just like this double asterisk. I want to create a power function in Python. So how do I do that? The power function is actually multiply with itself twice. So for example, if I just specify here pow, and if I specify here two values just like this 2, 3, then it's going to first take 2, then multiply it with 2, and then again multiply it with 2. The result is going to be 8. So I want to get this result using power function. So let me show you how we can create a power function with the help of our previous knowledge. So let me just create here a new function. So I'm going to say here define. I'm going to start with the define keyword to create a new function. Then I'm going to specify function name power. You are free to specify any name, that doesn't matter. Then I'm going to create two parameters here, x and n. And just for that, I'm going to specify body of this function. Now here I'm going to create a new variable result to store the result, and I'm going to specify default value to it. So I'm going to say here 1. Now here I'm going to call for loop. So here I'm going to say for I in range, and in the range I'm going to pass n variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a range of this n variable. So for example, if I just specify here 5, then this range is going to count from 0 to 5. So this for loop is going to execute at least 5 times. Just out of that, I'm going to specify scope of this for loop just like this, and then here I'm going to say result multiply equal to x. So I'm going to just multiply this value and store it in this result variable. Now just out of that, I'm going to just return this statement. So here I'm going to say return result just like this. You can notice I just put this return statement inside this function. If I specify here tab just like this, now this statement is in this for loop statement. I want to return this result once the for loop is terminated. So I'm going to just get rid of this indentation just like this. When I try to print this power function, let me show you what will be the result. If I just say here print, call the power function, and if I say here 2, 3, and when I execute this file, I'm going to have 8 as a result. So let me first explain this function. This 2 is now specified to this x variable, and this 3 specified to this n variable. I'm going to specify default value 1 to this result variable. Now this for loop is going to execute at least 3 times because we specify here 3 as a second parameter. This range is going to execute this for loop at least 3 times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first get the value of this x variable. So here I'm going to say 1 multiply by 1, it's going to return 2. Then I'm going to have 2 in this result variable. Then I'm going to multiply it by 2, and the result is going to store in this result variable again. So now I'm going to have 4 in this result variable. Then again at the last time this for loop is executed, 4 multiplied by 2, and I'm going to have 8 as a result, and I'm going to have that 8 result in this result variable, and once this for loop terminated, I'm going to just return that 8 result using this result variable. Now let me just do the same thing by calling the function himself. So for example, if I just modify this function, I'm going to just get rid of this function, and here I'm going to say if n is equal to 0, and then I'm going to start the if statement, and here what I'm going to do is, so here if n is equal to 0, I'm going to just exit from this function. To exit from the function, you just need to return 1, just like this. I'm going to just exit from this function using this return statement. Now you can notice I'm using this return statement to exit from this function. Now this statement is going to execute only if n is equal to 0. Now just out of that, I'm going to create here else statement, and in the else statement, I'm going to just return x multiply by power. I'm going to call the function itself, and here I'm going to call x comma n minus 1, just like this. So using this statement, I'm going to just minus the value of this n variable. So this statement is going to execute at least 3 times. When this n value becomes 0, I'm going to just exit from this loop, and I'm going to have result what I want. So when I execute this statement, you can notice I'm going to have 8 as a result. So you can notice I'm using the function itself to create a power function. So instead of using for loop, I'm going to use the function itself and minus the value of the n by 1. So when the n equals to 0, I'm going to just exit from this function. When you call the function itself, it's going to execute this function just like a loop. It's going to execute this power function again with its parameters and back to the top, and here it's going to check the values again and execute this statement again. So it's worked like a for loop. Calling the function themselves is called recursion. So this is what we call a function recursion. So I hope you understand the scope of the variables and how you can create function recursion. From the next lecture, we're going to take the advanced Python. So I will see you in the next one.